Welcome back to the channel. Come over here, come over here. So this is my nitrous drift car. It's got a nitrous tank in it, and that's where the system starts. Okay, it's got a pressure fitting right there, the sensor I should say. Got a filter on it, and then that runs up to the front. I'm not the first person that's ever done like nitrous on a Rx8, but a lot of times you'll see people, they usually use it for like highway hits, or you know, like roll racing, I guess you could call it, and they'll inject it right here. You'll have one nitrous injector, or they call them nozzles, right before the throttle body. It goes into all the, there's 3 ports per rotor, so they call these a 6-port motor. It goes into all 3 ports for each rotor. Now the problem with that is, this is a Rx8 lower intake manifold, and the way the lower intake manifold works is it's a sequential opening system. So you have the primary ports, which are just always open, and these will be closed. And then these are your secondary ports, which will open up about halfway up the rev range, and then about 2/3 from redline, these third ones will open up. Now, if you look closer, these are your fuel injection points. There's also 2 other ones in the motor, but we're not gonna worry about that right now. These go into your primary ports, these go into your secondary ports. There's no fuel injection on these auxiliary ports right here. And now the reason that there's no fuel injection on the auxiliary ports is because when the ports close, they actually tend to like volley the air back and forth between the rotors. And so basically the air changes directions a lot, and when air changes directions like that, you can have your fuel just fall out of, you know, aeration. So you'll end up having what's called like pooling of your fuel, and then, you know, you can blow your intake manifold up like that. So I decided that when I was going to do mine, I wanted to do something similar to what they call like a direct port injection. So here, let's go back to the prop over here. It's basically like a split system. You have the main manifold and then your auxiliary manifold. So right here, you know, this whole thing, these large ovals right here, they feed the primaries and the secondaries, and then you have the auxiliary ports over here. So what I decided to do was, when I was building this engine, I had these bungs welded in. These nitrous injectors, these nozzles, are only going to feed the primary and secondary ports. And that's by design, because I would like my nitrous to activate about halfway up the rev range. And that also has to do with the way the fuel system's designed in these cars, but I want to keep it out of the auxiliary ports. Anyways, that's enough about why I did it that way, and let me show you how I did it. So I started with a Zex wet kit, which is, you know, something they used to sell for these cars. I think Zex is kind of out of business. Don't quote me on that, but anyways, so it's a simple wet kit. You can see I kind of split it, so it's got a solenoid for the nitrous and a solenoid for the fuel, and then they're split to the different injection points. But it's just one controller. So the way that I have it activating, if you'll come in here, so I've got a Nitrous Express TPS RPM window switch. So the way that that works is when it's at, you know, nearly 100% throttle, it'll, and also in a specific window range, so that, or RPM range. So that's I have mine set to like 4,000 RPM, and it shuts off about 500 before redline. And the reason you do that is because you want to have the fuel pump at, like, you know, full output. These cars, they have like a low output and a high output mode for the fuel pump that it turns into high output around like 4,000 RPM. So you don't want to start spraying before then, and you also don't want to be spraying when you hit the red line, because the red line is a fuel cut and you'll just blow your motor to smithereens. Anyway, so that's the main activation circuit, and then I have this PSN1 from Innovate, and this essentially, it's just a safety gate. So the way that this works is it's going to monitor the nitrous pressure, and it also monitors the it's able to monitor the RPM, but I don't use that function. It also monitors AFR. So I have a wideband O2 sensor that I just pretty much threw in the OEM downstream O2 sensor location, and yeah, so it's going to monitor AFRs. If it's, you know, out of the range that I want it to be in, it'll cut off the nitrous. So that's why I say it acts like a safety gate. If you come back up here, I've got it all set up on this relay. Now this relay is connected to a Nitrous Express Maximizer EZ progressive switch, or progressive controller. And the way this works is it's got a little switch up here, and it basically it doesn't let all the nitrous and fuel be injected all at once, so it makes it a softer hit. You can change, you know, how fast it comes in. It basically ramps up over a period of time. So this one goes up from 0 to like 4.5 seconds. So it'll pulse the jets instead of just immediately opening them and letting them flow max flow. So it'll like I said, it's a bit of a softer hit than to just immediately hit it with, like, you know, I think in here I have a 60 horsepower shot. So, you know, 60 horsepower worth of fuel as well as nitrous. And another thing I forgot to mention is this is a wet shot kit, which is different than a dry shot. Wet shot injects fuel as well, so you don't need to like do a lot of ECU tuning. I mean, there are certain things that you want to look into with the ECU tuning, but fuel delivery is not one of them. Now, if you were doing like a dry shot in an Rx8 and you were gonna tune that, you know, with, let's say, like a Haltech or, you know, something like that, you know, you can inject it really anywhere. You know, you could do it right before the throttle body. It doesn't really matter all that much. But for me, I think that the best way to do it, especially for this being like a drift car, not like a roll racing or a drag racing kind of situation, is to inject it right here at the intake manifold. That way it stays out of that auxiliary port and it doesn't get volleyed back and forth between the rotors, and it doesn't get fuel pooling in the intake manifold and blow your intake manifold to pieces. Now, I did blow my intake manifold to pieces already one time, but that was my fault. I did something dumb. I was testing the system for leaks, and then I tried to deflood it. These cars, if you don't know, they have a deflood procedure because they sometimes tend to flood. You hold down the gas pedal, you turn the ignition. I thought that it cut fuel injection and ignition. Turns out it only cuts injection. And as soon as I bumped the key, I blew the top off the intake manifold. Now, blew the top off the intake manifold, blew the entire airbox to pieces, but everybody was all right. So like, it's okay, it doesn't matter, it's okay. It didn't even hurt the engine actually. Just, you know, had to replace the intake manifold. You know, shout out Romeo, you know, gave me one for free. It's not free, it came with it was in exchange for labor, hard labor. But anyways, purge valve, which tees in right here. So this is my nitrous line from the tank in the trunk, and it comes up in here and it tees out to the purge solenoid valve over here. You know, I had full intent to show my nitrous purge valve in action, but see what happened was I turned on the bottle valve and I actually blew my nitrous line apart. So I got to replace that. So no purge valve. Maybe I'll edit in a clip of the purge valve going off, but it's right here. Got it painted black so it doesn't rust all over again like it was doing the first couple of days. That's pretty much just for show. You don't really need something like that. The way that it works is that nitrous oxide is stored as like a liquid, and the line, you know, it fills with liquid, but then if there's space for it in the line, it'll evaporate and you'll have the gaseous nitrous oxide, and sometimes you'll have air bubbles in there. And drag racers will use, you know, a purge valve like this to essentially clean out their nitrous line, so it's just full of liquid nitrous oxide once again. And it's really just for show, but it's cool because it's like psst, psst, you know. But let me show you the switches that I got. And these are insanely custom, you know, one of a kind, bespoke pieces. So this is the activation switch. Let me put my keys in. Yeah, so activation switch right here. You see how it turns on with light? Isn't that so cool? And then you got the heater blanket for the bottle. Now you want your nitrous pressures to be like regular, you know, standardized, I should say. So people will use like bottle heaters to keep your pressure within like a certain range in the bottle. So that's what this one does, is it turns that bottle heater in the back on, and I guess I'll show you that in just a second. And this little red button right here, that's my purge valve, and you can hear it when I press it. That's the solenoid opening and closing. Again, I was gonna have it spray nitrous, but then my line blew up, so I had to replace the line. That's what happens when you don't secure your line and it gets dragged on the ground for a little while. But this is my window switch. You can see my PSN1 over here is also on. It's fairly simple. It's a little bit complicated, but it's fairly simple. There's not a whole lot of moving pieces. You know, the only mods that I did to the engine were really like supporting mods. They weren't anything that was like absolutely necessary, besides obviously the bungs that I put into the intake manifold. This is that heating blanket I was talking about. It's electric, you know, like the song goes. And it heats up the bottle, keeps it nice and warm. It's not on right now, so that ain't gonna work, but that's my nitrous drift car. That's how I set up my nitrous drift car. That's how I would recommend somebody else also set up their nitrous drift car, but you know, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I think that the most important parts are going to be a good TPS and RPM window switch, because you want to be, you know, you only want it to come on when you're 100% throttle and at a certain RPM. And I think a progressive switch, you know, the progressive controller, I think that's a important piece to the puzzle, because you don't want to like slam into your rotating assembly components with all that power. If you look around, you can see that there's 5 Rx8s here, and believe me, they all run, you know, at separate times though. Yeah, man, shout out Air Gas. They're my sponsors, they just don't know it yet.